Students, I'd like to introduce you to Leslie Wilcox. He's a professor at the London School of Economics. He's both a professor and a retired professor, and I don't know which keeps him more busy. We've been talking a little bit about well, not today, but in the past, we've been talking a lot about his work on the future of work, which I think is particularly interesting and will affect everybody. And he has a contrarian point of view in a way on this topic, and we'll explore that with him. So he's coming to you from London, England, where they've been having a tremendous heat wave this summer that's fortunately cooled off a bit. Leslie, being at the School of Economics, is surrounded by economists. And I was teasing him a little bit that he's managed to keep his good cheer in spite of being surrounded by those who study the gloomy science. And he promised to start us off with an anecdote.
About the economists, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I think economics is a very interesting area, and I've always been contrarian and hammering away at them because there is a certain sort of arrogance that they have relative to management subjects and information systems subjects, and not least indicated by the fact that they created for themselves their own Nobel Prize. So I've always been somewhat skeptical about their methods, especially about predicting the future. And I guess the anecdote is this, that our field, yours and mine, Fred, information systems, has always had economics envy. We've always sweated about their success and their robust research methods. But I have two colleagues at the London School of Economics who've seen the light. They're called John Kay and Mervyn King, and they wrote a great book called Radical Uncertainty 2020. And these are important, distinguished economists. Mervyn King was indeed the governor of the Bank of England at some stage, till he came back as visiting professor. And in that book, they actually present economics as a pseudo-natural science with a strong physics and mathematics envy. And they really question, in an uncertain and unstable world, whether economics research approaches actually delivers scientific method and predictability. For example, they question whether economics includes intentionality, reflexivity, agency, and beliefs as influential factors, and they question the simplistic assumptions that they build their models on. Too often they choose a set of simplifying assumptions and a model that their data set will fit, rather than be guided by what wider evidence is out there that needs to be incorporated and explained. So you can see the direction of travel here, which I've always enjoyed because I've believed this for many years, but John and Mervyn came to this understanding gradually. So it's always amusing having a good conversation with them. Anyway, so they say that the problem is that conditions of radical uncertainty of our real world, economists tend to use risk, probability, and predictions and overrate their ability to do so. They do so through bogus models and exercises in fantasy, which is pretty strong stuff from them. And it reminds me of what J.K. Galbraith said about economics forecasting. Those who don't know and those who don't know, they don't know. That's what economics forecasters divide into. So I think our field IS research does not need to suffer from economics envy.
Well, you mentioned research methods, and
Yeah.
I know you like to study the future. You're studying the future of work.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit first about how you go about studying the future?
Yeah, it's, well, as you can imagine, if we accept the macro world is highly unstable, there are a lot of extraneous factors. And if we accept that technology itself is very difficult to predict, There are always new emerging innovations. They combine in strange ways. That combination is accelerating. It's really about just the technology. We reckon that most of the performance of technologies, 25% of the performance is technology oriented, and the rest of it is management and organizational. That explains the performance. And you're actually in a very rich context. You can't just study technology by itself. There's what I call the push from the past, the pull from the future, and the friction of the present. And you have to build all that in if you're going to study how these are developed, implemented, and deployed. And knowing that this can take years, the impacts over a great deal of time. In fact, some studies show that technologies take from 6 to 26 years to become 90% deployed across the world's economies, if they do get deployed. So this doesn't mean that these are not going to be deployed, but what I found looking at automation and the future of work was that there is this sort of a belief that there's going to be this overwhelming tsunami of automation and AI. They now deflate that into artificial intelligence, although that's enormously overhyped, and that we're going to all be swept away in job loss on a global basis within 10 years. That was the sort of theory back in 2017 when I first started looking at this. And I started digging away at the organizational level and discovered that actually that's not what I was finding. I was finding a whole raft of other factors that were not included in that prediction about the technology and its impact on job loss that were not included in the research reports. So I set about finding out how one can challenge the notion of a robo-apocalypse between now and 2013, between 2018 and 2030. And this is what I came up with based on my own studies and lots of other reports. First of all, that there were things militating against an overwhelming tsunami of technology and job loss. Automation, creating jobs was really downplayed. It was like there was no jobs created from automation. We found that actually there was a hell of a lot of jobs being created in automation, including at the organizational level. There's this assumption that all jobs can be wholly automated. We've never found that. That technology is somehow perfectible. We've never found that. That organizations can seamlessly and quickly deploy automation and AI. We found that they run into massive problems trying to deploy this stuff. That humans are machines that can be easily replicated by machines. That's not what we found. That somehow it's politically, socially, and economically feasible to apply these technologies, that the contextual factors are not going to be problematic. And then one of my original contributions to say, well, no one, there's this big black hole in the study of jobs, which is no one factors in the amount of dramatic increases in the amount of work to be done, which I reckon the amount of work to be done increases between 10 and 15% per annum across developed economies. And nowhere is that factored into the notion of global job loss. And I go into some detail about where that dramatic increase in jobs to be done comes from. So then you sort of take in various factors like, well, all the economies are reporting productivity hits. If they don't adopt automation, how are they going to get productivity? How are they going to get these productivity increases? How are they going to deal with the fact that places like China and Japan have actually have skill shortages stretched into the future because of the demographics of the population, where more and more older people are coming leaving the labor force. So when you look at all that, I think my conclusions was all this has been enormously overhyped. There will be a skills challenge going into the future, a massive one, but not a job loss problem. And so I thought, for researching the futures, I thought, well, what I've done here is I've said you can't have false assumptions if you're going to try to predict the future. And you can attack a lot of people who do futures research by looking at their assumptions. And if the assumptions are false, then probably the conclusions are. And that's exactly what I found here. And of course, we're now in a world where everyone's talking about skill shortages and too many jobs and not enough people to fill them. So, which is something I actually predicted in this article.
You talked about work to be done, and it's growing. Can you characterize what sort of work that is?
Sorry, I don't understand.
Well, like for example, as we get global warming, there's probably environmental work, maybe inventing.
Oh, the amount of work to be done.
Yeah. What sort of work do you see as being growing?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, there's the inevitable growth of what I call audit, regulation, and bureaucracy, which creeps across our economies. And it seems to have an inner dynamic. So there's that one source. The other source of amount of work to be done increasing is information technologies themselves. There's all the jobs that are related to delivering that stuff. There's the fact that in creating solutions, they also create problems. I mean, I cite as an obvious example, cybersecurity. There's a massive increase in the industry of cybersecurity. It's an exponential increase from now and right into the future, which creates an enormous amount of jobs. There's an enormous amount of increase in sensors. In China, they employ thousands, hundreds of thousands of sensors for the internet, for example. There's all this job growth around technology, which creates problems as well as solutions.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go on. Well, those are the main sources, but yeah, well, that's enough for the moment. There are well, I think the other thing is it's amazing how inefficient people's uses of these technologies are. So, for example, people praise multi-skilling. You're sitting at a desktop, Fred, and if you were multi-skilling, you would be distracting yourself from one task into another, and the downtime between that is enormous, in fact, and also your lack of attention means you have to reboot yourself in order to get back up to speed. So when you add up all that happening across an economy with everyone on desktops, the level of inefficiency in terms of office work is massive. And so that creates more amount of work to be done.
I remember when there was a push for what used to be called grid computing, and there was this SETI program where people in the background of their PCs would have data from radio telescopes running to look for consistent patterns of external communication. And when you talk about inefficiency, if you look at the amount of time a PC is actually doing work that a human generates,
exactly.
It's like a millionth of its capacity, if that much. Yeah. So that you know, in a culture where everybody has a laptop or a PC, and there's billions of cell phones, or what are called digital mobile devices, I guess now, the capacity that's unused is enormous. If you could, it's like solar energy. I mean, we convert what a 100th% of the sun's rays to electricity. Anyway, sorry, I'm going on about efficiency. I was going to ask.
Can I just add? You just triggered one. You triggered one. Data overload. Data overload. There's an exponential increase in the amount of data to be processed on the globe. Yeah, I think I forget. Does it double every 18 months? I forget what these great estimates are. But somebody's got to do something with that data, which creates an enormous amount of work, and which is increasing all the time. So that's one of the answers, of course, to the massive amount of work to be done is to start automating and using AI, which, you know, is a solution, but it then creates its own problems because that generates information as well.
So do you have like a vision, say in 2040, what the workforce might look like?
We do. I haven't written it down on my notes here, but I can start trying to vaguely remember what I wrote in the book. I think I only stretch it as far as 2030 because predicting beyond that is getting a bit silly, and actually beyond 5 years is speculative. And so I can restrict it to 2030 if I may for today's purposes. But I think about 16% of the jobs in existence will cease to exist. I think probably over 2/3 of the jobs will be materially altered and automated to some degree or other, 20% or more, by 2030. I think that the non-digital jobs, you know, the manual workforce types of jobs, will go from about 42% of the global workforce to about 34%. So there will still be a lot of work that is not digitalized. I think the notion that all work can be automated is not viable. I did a study of 18 skill sets at work, and I think we came to the conclusion that about 11 of those can't really be materially automated, whereas, you know, the rest can, and they can be semi-automated to some degree by 2030. And computers can't do certain things. And to put it starkly, you'll be very familiar with the terminology, your audience might not be, but, you know, one does induction, one does deduction, but one also does abduction, which is humans are really good at abduction, which is looking at whatever is available and saying, this is the best possible explanation for what we're finding. Machines don't do that, and they can't do it. And it's a fundamentally fatal flaw if you're thinking that artificial intelligence can become like human intelligence. They can't do abduction. I mean, everyone recognizes that in the business. So, so people with that skill are absolutely vital. Just going back here, you know, Sherlock Holmes, you might recall, many of you might, is famous for his deductive capabilities, but he misrepresents himself, saying it's all about deduction. He's actually highly skilled in abduction, arriving at the best explanation for the information available. And so, you know, I would say to any student, you know, get good at this sort of area, and critical thinking is, of course, one part of abduction. So does that answer your immediate question?
Yeah, and you've already started on this, but maybe you can elaborate further. What would be the implications as you see it for people that are, say, 18 to 22 years old? Notice the students in my class.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I think you do have to see that there's a long-term move from certain types of jobs to more attractive jobs. And, you know, if I could polarize that, yeah, you know, there's a move from manual, unskilled kind of jobs to more technical, more brain power needed, more semi-skilled and multi-skilled. The human skills still are very, very relevant in terms of the distinctive human skills of delegation, leadership, motivation, team forming, thinking outside the box, all those sorts of things. So they're all still valuable, but the so-called, what do they call them? The engineering, mathematics, engineering, technological skills become more valuable. That's the move, essentially. So you have to address where you are on that spectrum and where the jobs might be, where, given that skill move, even though there are still a lot of manual skills going to be needed in 2030 and thereafter.
So I would, I don't know if it's putting words in your mouth, but I would say that you first need to know yourself and the skills you are good at and things that you enjoy. If that happens to be technical, you want to push that as far as possible.
Very good.
If it is not technical, then you want to push for the ability to delegate, to formulate teams, to consider what's possible and how to serve other people as well as yourself, that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, well, the answer really is simply is see what machines can't do and will not be able to do and become great at it.
Yeah.
And interestingly, you know, in the LSE, we do run master's degree courses, and we tell our students, well, look, this is a master's degree in information systems and innovation, and you need to have a relationship to technical skills, depending on what job you're going into. Some of you will be developers, but some of you will just be senior managers who need a certain amount of knowledge about a certain type of technology. But the more important skills that are generic in the future are critical thinking, team building, knowing how to research, and self-learning. And with those, you're extremely well equipped to deal with any change in the technology in the future.
Leslie, I could talk to you all day, but the education czars tell us to keep these video interviews on the short side.
Sure, sure.
I'd like to go back to something that you said about multitasking and assure you that there is no other task I could be doing that would come up to my joy of interacting with you. So
that's very kind.
It's not difficult. It's actually quite a pleasure to be spending this time with you and pay attention to what you have to say. Any last thought you'd like to leave our students with?
Well, yeah, I think there's researching the future is actually something we don't do very well in information systems, and we really need to get into that. And you know, someone once said, you know, you should give up on predicting the future. You know, the best way of forecasting the future is, if in doubt, say it's going to be like last year, update your forecast frequently and don't keep records. I think that actually I'm more a believer in something that I think Louis Pasteur said in the 19th century. Remember, he was the one who virtually invented vaccination and pasteurization, and he said, I think I wrote it down somewhere. Let me just have I just like to quote him verbally. Yeah, you know, he was researching that, and of course, remember, we developed a vaccine for coronavirus in 9 months. And he was talking in the 19th century, and look what we've learned since, because we researched the area. And he said, but just before he invented vaccination, I am on the edge of mysteries and the veil is getting thinner and thinner. That's because he was researching. Fortune favors the prepared mind. And I think that's what guides me, I think, in this area.
Thank you very much, Leslie. And you may end up with an email someday in the future. This is a prediction, not a speculation, with further questions if the students have any.
Fine.
So thank you again. I'm sorry they aren't here to ask you the questions themselves, but a very stimulating and helpful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Good luck with it.
Thank you.